Welcome to the Brave Woman at Work podcast. This is your host, Jen Pastikas. I'm so glad you're here. With the Brave Woman at Work podcast, you'll get the resources and tips along with real-world stories and humor to empower and inspire you to take bolder and braver actions in your career and life. Well, hello, Jaitara. Welcome to Brave Woman at Work. How are you today?
I'm very well, Jen. Thank you for having me as your guest.
Oh, of course, of course. So I love me a good story. So tell me about your background and how you've gotten to where you are today.
Okay, well, that could use up a whole podcast in
I
itself.
know. I know we're going to have to
Uh,
like pick and choose, pick and choose.
yeah. Well, what got me on this particular path of helping people with their sexual energy, clearing the past sexual wound imprint, and now this body of work that I have is, called Pleasure and Prosperity. Before I started any of this, I was a professional actor. And I also enjoyed writing and doing illustration. And the turning point for me was back in 1999 when I was living in Toronto, Canada, and I was standing on a subway platform. And there was a big billboard across from me on the platform that was sponsored just only for a couple months by the police department. And it said teenage prostitution is child abuse. And I
Oh,
went into shock because at the time I was 42. And I carried that secret for 27 years. I was that child.
oh,
And I'd never acknowledged until that moment that I'd actually been an abuse victim. So that was, I don't even remember the journey home, but when I got home, it was like 27 years of suppressed emotions erupted out of me, the grief, the anger, the sadness, the
wow.
grieving the loss of my adolescence. And it was so intense. I cried out, God, please help me. And in that moment, a bird landed on my back patio railing, and I instantly became peaceful because,
Oh,
I follow a spiritual path, and spirit tends to communicate to me through animals because they know I'm going to look it up. And I instantly became peaceful. So I went and got my animal speak book by Ted Andrews on animal totems. And the bird was a grackle. The teaching of a grackle is to release emotional congestion from the past before it manifests into physical illness. You can move forward into the future.
wow.
So that was the beginning of my healing journey. I gave myself permission to just stay home and just release the emotions and purge. It took me a couple of days. If I'd known about the modalities I do now, I could have done it in a couple of hours, but that was my journey at the time. And a veil lifted after those 2 days. There was a layer of shame that was just released. And it was such a powerful experience. And, there was still a lot more healing to do that followed, but it was a breakdown that very quickly turned into a spiritual breakthrough that sent me on my healing journey. And then what unfolded after that just became really beautiful and very powerful journey for me. So that inspired me to help others on their path to do the same.
So I have to ask, so was it subconscious when you like saw that sign and it just like cracked something open and you didn't even remember? Or did you actually know and were carrying around that shame for years and years and years?
I knew and was carrying around the shame for years and years. Yeah.
Okay.
But I thought there was that inner voice like, oh my God, if they know I'm really a whore, they won't want to be my friend. So there was that self-judgment, that self-shame I didn't even acknowledge. I was just a teen at the time that I'd actually been an abuse victim, and that changed my perspective completely. And for anyone who've experienced past sexual abuse of any kind, shame is a very common thread because often what happens, especially if you're a child, I work with a lot of people who were abused as a small child, and rarely is it a forcing on. It's usually done very manipulative because our physical nerve endings that create physical pleasure still function. So often there's a manipulation technique to make it feel good. This is our secret. This is because I love you so much. This is because you're so special. So then there's a shame that gets carried on because there is an aspect of it that was physically pleasurable. So there's that shame, that self-judgment that tends to be carried with it. So that's what's sort of unique about this sexual abuse, is that confusion that tends to be with a person who's experienced that.
And like, Brene Brown says that shame cannot live in a vacuum, only if it's silent, right? As soon as you start talking about it, that's when shame starts to dissipate, which is
Yeah.
the beautiful work that you do. But it sounds like that's clearly why that shame manifests and grows and keeps everyone quiet, is because we're confused
Hmm.
about the physical sensation of pleasure when we mentally may know that it's wrong.
Yes. And literally weeks before my big breakthrough, that was when Oprah first came out and spoke publicly about what had happened to her. And that's an element she spoke about, that aspect of pleasure that was inflicted on her when she was abused by her uncle, and why it was so confusing for her for so many years. So she was the first one to speak publicly about it in a way that a lot of people heard. And then it was literally a few weeks later when I had this big breakdown to break through for myself.
Wow. So people that are listening may be wondering, women that are listening are going like, Jen, this show is called Brave Women at Work. We talk about work, we talk about work things, we talk about career, you're talking about negotiation and like, winning your next job and all this kind of stuff. So how does this connect, right? So
Yes.
when I met you, Jaitara, I just knew that there are women out there, and we can't separate. What I've learned over through my own burnout and healing is that we can't separate the mind and the body.
Yeah.
And so we're one package. So that's why I wanted to do this public service and have this conversation with you, because there are many women probably that are self-sabotaging or wondering why they're not getting forward faster in their career, or why they're not making those leaps professionally or personally, both, like we said. And so I just didn't know if you wanted to comment on that, just to kind of tie the ends together for our listeners.
Thank you. Yes. Um, yeah, what happens when there's been any kind of constriction, and it's not just abuse, whether it's child abuse from childhood, or it could be shame due to really strict religious upbringing. That I call it the sexual wound imprint. It shows up as abuse. It shows up as religious imprints, just strict upbringing. Some people carry something and they're not even sure of the origin. It could be ancestral. What happens, there's always this holding back to protect this vulnerable aspect of yourself. And when you're holding back, it filters into every other area of your life. And sexual energy is what creates our human existence. I mean, we're not just flesh and bones. Spiritual mentorship is an aspect of what I do. But before we come into these physical bodies, we're non physical love intelligence. Our parents have sex. Now we're divine love intelligence inhabiting inside human form into the
Hmm.
physical. So I see sexual energy as literally the power cord that connects the two realms. And whether we were conceived through love is irrelevant. This is how we are designed, that who we are as spiritual beings is intended to merge with who we are as physical beings. And when there's a disconnect, a split from that, um, that's where the shame comes in. Abuse cannot exist when it's spiritually connected, when we're merging those two bodies together, a spiritual body and our sexual body. So, because sexual energy is at the very root of what creates our human existence, just like the roots of a tree, if there's constriction there, it can never blossom to its full potential. So, if we're always holding back to protect this vulnerable aspect of ourselves, it filters into our voice, our confidence, the way we carry our body, what we're creating in the world. What we're creating in the world is what creates our prosperity. So, it shows up in all aspects of our life.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So you keep using the word sexual wound imprint. So can you talk about that word? We know that the sexual wound, and I really appreciate that you made it clear that there might be people listening that actually have had sexual trauma, whether that's abuse, rape, any types in that category. But then it also can be the shame around a very constrictive religion,
Mhm.
and like the mental discord with like, oh, it's wrong for me to enjoy sexual intercourse or pleasure in any form, right? So there's all that. But why the word imprint? Can you talk to the word imprint?
Sure. And this is true of any wound. It could be the betrayal wound imprint. So, for example, when I work with a client, um, we help tap into their subconscious to trace the wound that they have, whatever the emotional wound is, all the way back to the origin of when it was first imprinted on them. So let's just say if you have the betrayal wound, You were 5 years old and you felt badly betrayed by something that happened. That betrayal imprint was imprinted on you. And unless it's cleared at that time, that will continue to show up throughout your life like a knee jerk reaction, different people, different places, but you'll have that repeated experience of, of betrayal. Some people have, abandonment was my core wound
Yeah,
that,
me too.
that I've had
Yeah.
to work through. That was a big one for me. So you need to go back all the way to the source. Otherwise, you're addressing the symptoms. And it's really about, finding that the origin of that wound when it was first imprinted on you on a soul level and just pouring the acknowledgement, love, and compassion that that aspect of you needed to receive at that time that they never did.
Mm. So, and this goes to the work you do, and we'll talk more specifically about that work. But do
Mhm.
you recommend for someone to get to that core, right? Because they may not even remember,
Yeah.
like they'll either remember or maybe they don't, and they've like blocked it out or it's subconscious or what have you. So, how do you get to those like the deeper roots? And any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it can be challenging to do your on your own. That's the work I do. And you're right, the mind's ability to remember is very limited. So when I work with someone in a private one-on-one, that's what we do. There's a specific method I use where the subconscious is able to reveal when the original imprint first happened.
Okay. And then what are some of the signs or symptoms, right? So I always am telling people so that they can be on the lookout. It's the shame. I hear that for
Mm.
sure. But are there any like other mental or physical emotional signs or symptoms that you can't just put this trauma under the rug, that you have to deal with it? Now, you would probably argue like you always have to deal with it, but just so that people can be mindful and watchful in their own histories to be like, oh, yes, it is rearing its head. I do need to do something proactively to address and heal this.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, showing up in personal relationships and in sexual intimacy is very, very common. There can be a holding back. And I just want to clarify too, if you're in a relationship with someone and their sexual desires or preferences are very different from you, that doesn't necessarily means there's a sexual wound imprint. It just means there may be a lack of compatibility with preference. But if it's showing up, um, often it shows up in an inability to speak your voice, an inability to communicate what your wants and your needs are. Again, there's this feeling of holding back. You know, intuitively, if there's a part of you that just wants to hold back and protect yourself. So it can show up in the power of your voice. It can show up, physically. Your shoulders may be slightly rounded because there's this protection of your heart center.
Okay. So, and just to be clear on this whole communication piece, it's not only you might, and I immediately thought of, oh, well, I'm not willing to or able to communicate my needs from a pleasure or sexual perspective. But it's not just that. You're saying entirely like communicating, setting boundaries, like this is what I need, this is what I don't need, like just using your
Mhm.
voice, period, correct?
Yeah, and just knowing how to say no is a complete sentence.
Hmm.
Well, I was in my 40s before I figured out how to do that. I'm 68 now. And this is so common with so many women. Learning how to say no is a complete sentence. Because at the core, when I speak of feminine, masculine, I'm speaking of an essence and energy. At the feminine is naturally very nurturing. So we want to explain or no. We don't want to hurt people's feelings with our no. We want to justify our no. That's very, very common. So it can be very empowering to just learn how to just say no in a complete sentence and be in the power of that.
Okay. Okay, that makes sense. And so, in the context of the work you do, you also have a program, or it's called Sacred Pleasure and Prosperity. What does that mean to you? And the reason that I wanted to kind of tease out or parse out the word pleasure,
Yeah.
and so I'm gonna out us Americans. I know you're Canadian. You just made sure I remembered. I don't know if it's like this in Canada, but in the US, like there's this puritanical, like, like where it's very puritanical. And when you hear the word pleasure, it's like almost taboo. we don't use that word in our lexicon as Americans very often. And
Mhm.
so I just wanted to kind of hit on the word pleasure because it's not in my as I'm growing spiritually, as I'm growing in this work from personal development and coaching and all this stuff, is that pleasure is not just like a sexual pleasure. It can be just
No.
pleasure of life,
Yeah.
pleasure of being human, pleasure of being here. And
Mm.
so I just wanted to get your definition of what sacred pleasure and prosperity mean to you. And then if you can dive in more on that word pleasure and why do we mess around? Why do we make this so taboo? So I'll let you share.
Yeah, well, the opposite of pleasure is pain.
Oh,
So,
there you
as
go.
I've shared with you, it's our natural impulse to reach for pleasure. And you're right. I'm not just speaking of sexual pleasure. We love food is one really good example. We want food that gives us pleasure that we can savor and enjoy. The pleasure of being out in nature, the pleasure of the warm sun on our face, the pleasure of movement and dance. So I want to clarify that this isn't just about sexual pleasure, even if celibacy is your choice. That's beautiful. You want to make that choice from a place of peacefulness and contentment versus fear, wounding, and avoidance. So we
Mm.
are designed for pleasure. And believe the reason there's a taboo around it um, years ago, I mean, this has been going on for centuries, where certain religions inflicted shame and judgment around our sexual energy as a method of control. How better to control a society when you're shaming and judgment, the very energy that creates our human existence and the very energy we can't resist? And I want to qualify the difference between what pleasure and what I refer to as sacred pleasure. So just surface level pleasure. And I love using my sugar addiction as an analogy. I used to have
Oh
really
yes, I'm
bad
here.
sugar
I'm here
addiction,
too.
and it's still sometimes a work in progress, or I used to work on film sets. And I remember I caught one day in particular, I'm there taking handfuls of Smarties and shoving them in my mouth when no one's looking. And I was like, what am I doing? And I realized what it was doing. I was just like shoving it, just it was surface. I wasn't thinking about it. So when I realized, okay, this is pleasure food, so it needs to be savored. Once I switched to getting only having good quality chocolate that could dissolve slowly, then the desire for it, I wasn't constantly trying to fill this void. It felt fulfilling. So apply that the same to whether it's sexual pleasure, if it's surface level and just physical release, there's nothing wrong with that. But you run the risk of it becoming addictive.
Mm.
Again, we're not just flesh and bones. We have a soul. We have a spirit. So it makes sense that the very energy that creates our human existence should be multi-layered. The feminine, especially, we want our heart and our soul penetrated and opened and seen before we really feel fully inspired to invite someone in to share our body. So it's having it fulfilling on a deep soul level. That's what I refer to as sacred pleasure.
Okay, so that makes sense. So, like the variations or the stratifications of pleasure, like pleasure for pleasure's sake, the addictive type of pleasure, like maybe more of devoid of like deeper meaning. There's nothing
Mhm.
wrong with it, but that's pleasure. But you're saying sacred, like getting really to the soul,
Mhm.
really deep levels of pleasure can be. But what also is really exciting is that some people may just think that the only pleasure that's accessible for them is that surface level. When, it's exciting for you to say, no, 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 you can heal or you can grow or you can, achieve sacred
Mhm.
pleasure. Again,
Mhm.
not only being sexual in nature, but also just savoring your life.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, it's just
Exactly.
that's like just delicious. There's a good word that describes it. Just delicious what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So you also pair though, and we talk about money on this podcast. So that's
Mhm.
why, I was like, oh, there's a money aspect. There's the prosperity prospect. So why is it connected in your program? Like the idea of prosperity with pleasure?
Thank you. Yeah, and just like I don't see pleasure as only sexual, there's many, many areas of it. Prosperity too. There's prosperity in health, prosperity in love, and yes, prosperity financially. So I'll use some examples here. You could be extremely financially wealthy and not enjoying a life of sacred pleasure at all. But then you may feel very there could be a void there. There's not a happiness. You're not experiencing an inner joy. I've discovered that those of us who are on a spiritual path, it's really important that we take great pleasure in the work that we're offering in the world.
Hmm.
And again, sexual energy is at the very core of our creative force. So for me, I'll use myself as an example. Whenever I got off track in my career and I was doing what I thought I should do to make money versus what my heart and my soul was really calling me to do, it didn't work. It didn't work for me. And I've noticed those who are on a spiritual path and exploring that direction, that they do struggle creating that financial prosperity if they're out of alignment of what they're really here to do.
I want to comment on that because some folks, I look on LinkedIn and you see those that ring around a lot of people's profile, open to work, and a
Hmm.
lot of frustration. I have friends that have been on a very frustrating, very difficult journey to find work, at least in the US. I don't know if it's in
Yeah.
Canada or worldwide, but it's been tough.
Hmm.
It's been a tough market.
Yeah.
And so I just want people to know that, maybe you do a baby step, maybe you have a side hustle, maybe you have a project, maybe you have something, but I like what you're saying is like tapping into that creative life force.
Hmm.
Even if you are in a role, I just want to be real with people, right? Like that, pays the bills.
Hmm.
Ultimately, we'd love for you, and I agree with you that like we want to all be doing what our soul's highest calling is, and to be getting paid for it. That's the beautiful intersection.
Yeah.
What is
Yeah.
that called? Ikigai. That's that Japanese ikigai where it's the intersection of what you love and your passion and your
Mhm.
purpose and what you can get paid for. So I can share a link to what ikigai is so you can map your own.
Mm.
But what I will say is that some people are like, yeah, yeah, that's nice, like let's be real. But you know what? You can weave it in. You can weave it in, like I said, in your hobbies. And if you want to have a side hustle or just having pleasure projects that really light you up. So I just didn't know if you had any comments on that.
Yeah, and I've had jobs in the past where I did because I had to pay my the bills and it wasn't exactly what I wanted to do. Um, but always reaching we all come into this world with unique gifts to offer. So,
Right.
so what lights you up, what fills your heart and soul? And when we do that in a way that is a benefit to others, that's when we really feel fulfilled on a soul level.
Yes.
And prosperity doesn't necessarily mean like a big bank account. You can have a big bank account but not be happy. For
Mm.
me, when I think of sacred prosperity, again, it's about being fulfilled on a soul level. So you may not have a big bank account, but you live in a home that you love where you're surrounded by nature. That to me is living a life of prosperity. You have beautiful friends and family that you have beautiful, loving relationships with. That's feeling that prosperity and love. You have good health. That's also a form of prosperity.
Okay, so you've done a nice definition for me. So it doesn't mean that you have to be wealthy. So you can be wealthy
Mhm.
or quote unquote rich, but not prosperous or sacredly prosperous, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to use myself as an example. Currently, I don't have a lot in my bank account because I've been investing so much into my business. So I
Right.
so I've been, but I love where I live. I have a lovely home. I'm looking out my window and I've got a park in my backyard with a duck pond. So
Ooh.
I'm living this beautiful, prosperous existence. I have amazing friends in my life. So I feel prosperous. I have that happiness. And and I hear some really dark, intense, heavy stories when I help people with their sexual clearing. I mean, I hear horrible stories of child abuse. That's not easy to hear, but seeing the transformation that it creates for people when I help clear the past pain around that, when we transcend the pain into wisdom, that for me just brings me so much joy to be able to witness the transformation. So that's where I receive my pleasure from that work.
Okay, so that's really great to hear. And it's great that you're living it. So it's also good because you have had the experience of probably not living in sacred pleasure and prosperity. I mean, you said first 42 years of your life. So after you went through the healing journey, and I don't know how long it was or what it was like for you, have
Mhm.
you felt like a marked difference in your life? Like, the you of old, but before, from birth to 42 and then after, was it a marked difference?
Yes. Yes. And I did have a good childhood. It was my adolescence where
Okay.
it happened. So I had I'm really blessed to have had a really loving relationship with my mother.
Okay.
I hit teens, I left home, the rules were too strict, but I didn't have a father who showed up. So that played a big role in me being easily manipulated. So, yeah, there was definitely a marked difference because there was that constant underlayer of insecurity, self-judgment, shame that I was carrying around. So, I enjoyed working as an actor. I enjoyed working as an artist and doing those things, but there was always that constant layer of holding back out of protection, not wanting
Mm,
not wanting to fully be seen for fear of being fully seen. Whereas
interesting.
once that healing took place, then there's just an openness or just an ease and a comfort, just a landing in my own body, just a comfort, just feeling comfortable with who I am as a person.
Very cool. So one of the things on your site that I love, and I was just hoping you can give us like a sneak peek because I want everyone to go and take this. I took this, it's an archetype quiz. So it is the Sacred Pleasure and Prosperity Archetypes quiz to
Mhm,
find out our specific archetype, and it's on your website, and we'll make sure that that's linked up in the show notes.
mhm.
And I was wondering if you could give an overview of the different archetypes and once we find out our archetype, like what that might say about us. I just love these kinds of things. So
Yes,
you
yes.
feel free to share.
So you took the quiz?
I did, but I can't remember my result. I looked
Oh, you
at
don't
it.
remember.
Yeah, I don't remember. So I'll remember
Okay.
once you go through the archetypes, and then I'll be able to tell you the one that I am once you go through. Because I did read it.
Okay.
It's been quite a while.
Okay. And I'm opening up the book to make sure I don't forget any.
Okay.
There's 8 altogether. And so it's
Okay.
sort of like an astrology chart where your sun sign is the one running the show and the rest are supporting, and the placement of the others determine your unique personality, your unique, I call it your sacred pleasure and prosperity language. So I'll start with the romantic. That's my primary. So every archetype has unique gifts and every archetype has unique challenges. So the challenges of the primary are always the biggest challenges that you have. So the supporting ones, when you focus on the gift, it helps neutralize the challenges. So, it helps you point a finger at what hasn't been working and understand that. So the gifts of the romantic, we're very good at one-on-one connection. That's why I'm very, very good, especially with matters of the heart. So here I've chosen a career where I do a lot of private one-on-one work where I connect with people's hearts.
Mm-hmm.
And that brings me a lot of joy. The other aspect of it, we're a bit of a hedonist. I have to have comfort around me. I have to have fabrics that feel soft. I always buy myself flowers. We just, the romantic, we like that romantic environment.
Okay.
The challenge of the romantic is we can lead to overindulgence. Oh,
Sweets.
yeah.
Me too. Me
There,
too.
we have to really be careful about overindulgence. And if there's a void of not feeling loved, how that can show up is the romantic can spend very compulsively, and we'll spend our last, say if there's only a couple of $100 in the account, we're happy to spend about 150 just to buy that nice thing that we want. The
Okay.
gift is we know we don't tend to stress or worry about money. We just know that there's going to be more where that came from. We know it's an ever giving flow. So we can, spend so we have nothing left in our bank account because we know there's going to be more coming in the next week. So,
Okay. Got it.
but the challenges too is we tend to not be very good at saving, and we are horrible at paperwork because we find it so boring, we'll avoid it and pretend that it's not there. So it really helps.
Ah,
So if you have a guardian in your chart, so if say you have a guardian as a secondary or as a third place, the guardian is the one that's really, really good at managing money. They'll never be in debt. They'll never live above their means. Um, their challenges, they tend to live through fear. They hold on really tight. They fear that there won't be more where that's coming from. So the romantic and the guardian are kind of opposites. They actually complement one another.
okay.
So if you tap into your inner guardian as a romantic, that's actually really important because it's important to maintain your paperwork, to keep your finances in order. On a personal, intimate level, how the romantic shows up, again, they make wonderful lovers. They're really beautiful in relationships, but you have to watch that overindulgence.
Okay.
So that's a thing. And I'm just touching on the surface because there's 8 of them.
So
So
what about the guardian? What was the positives for the guardian?
the Guardian is, well, financially, you're just, they're
Okay.
like money,
Rock
money and the
solid.
Guardian are a match made in heaven. If you're going to hire an accountant or a bookkeeper, you want them to have a strong Guardian. They're just
Okay.
the best at money management. It,
Okay.
yeah. So the challenge you have to be careful about when it comes to relationships, they can be a bit of a penny pincher. The Guardian will resist spending any money on themselves, getting a massage, a nice meal out, any of that. Um, so yeah, it helps in a relationship if you just, open up, tap into your inner romantic a bit. Remember,
Okay.
life is also supposed to be fun. So, make space to enjoy some of the pleasures of life as well.
Okay. And then what are the others?
Well, there's the alchemist. The alchemist is that one that has that love, and I'm speaking into the money aspect first. The alchemist is that one that has that love-hate relationship with money. And they tend to judge people who have it. So they tend to hold themselves away from it because you can't attract something that you're judging and resenting at the same time. They tend to resent its existence. They want the money, but they resent it at the same time.
Okay.
So the alchemist is a brilliant idea people. They tend to be very creative. So the key for them is to focus on how can you apply your brilliant ideas in a way that you can monetize it in a way that's of benefit for other people.
Mm.
That will fill the heart of the alchemist.
Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, I'm just speaking on the financial aspect, whereas
Yeah,
my
the high level. Yeah.
I go into how it affects you in relationships and intimacy as well. The luminary is, you can recognize them because they love wearing sparkly things. They wear clothes that have a lot of glitz. They love things that are glitz. And they can be very charismatic. They make good leaders. Um, they have to be careful. The challenge for them is they can overspend for appearance because they may not have felt appreciated or acknowledged. They may have been neglected as a child. So they try to make up for it I'm talking about if they're out of alignment by overspending on appearance, wanting to get noticed. Whereas if they do their healing work and they relax and settle into the beauty of who they are on the inside, yeah, then professionally, they would, for example, they make great brand experts. They're really good at
Mm.
helping people make a really good first impression. They're really good at that.
Mm. Okay.
The connector is another one. The connector is what it says it is. They're very good at connecting with people. Say if you were running a table at a trade show, a connector would be a perfect person to man that table because they just love connecting with everybody. And for them professionally, their income comes from their ability to make really good connections. However, the challenge for them when it comes to financially is they're the one most likely to be taken advantage of because they don't want to have they're like the extreme, even beyond the romantic of not paying attention to paperwork. So it's really important for them if someone else is taking care of their books and their management that they pay attention to it because they can be taken advantage because they don't want to have anything to do with managing money. And they actually can struggle in entrepreneurship. They're happier if their money's coming from another source, such as a spouse, an employer, if they're being taken care of financially versus having to
Generate that. Yeah.
generate it on their own. Yeah.
Okay.
The emperor, I call it emperor/emperor because it's the only one that, the rest are sort of aren't defined masculine or feminine. So the empress or the emperor, depending if you're masculine or feminine, they're the empire builder. They're really good at creating an empire where everyone thrives. So when they're especially in alignment, the distorted emperor would be someone creating an empire um, where they're not kind to those beneath them. But when you're in alignment, they create the empire where everybody thrives. Someone who's really in alignment, who creates a corporation with a lot of staff, who has a big team, and the team is happy, they're thriving. That's the sign of an empress or an emperor who's in alignment.
This is mine. This is mine. Yep.
There you go.
Yeah.
Okay.
I as soon as you like, I knew like once you said I because I read all the way through your ebook, which we'll chat
Mhm.
about in a minute. But yes, I'm an Empress. So there you go.
Yeah. So your challenge is that you run the most risk of being a workaholic.
Yes, check.
Because you love building your empire so much. So for you, the work-life balance is really important. So if you
Yes.
have a romantic in there, even if you don't, it's nice to tap into your inner romantic, because the romantic will always make time to enjoy life.
Okay. I gotta have you. I gotta have you and other romantics in my life.
Yeah, exactly. That will
Okay.
really help balance things out.
Yeah. It's okay. So how many more do we have?
Okay, nurturer.
Nurturer.
The nurturer is, as it seems, they're professionally, they're like the ideal person to manage a team. Um,
Mm,
People always feel seen and acknowledged by the nurturer. How I'm going to talk about how this shows up for them personally. They can give to the point where they may feel a little resentful, because
mm,
they're the one most likely to put themselves in debt to help people out that they love. So it also shows up in their personal relationships. They'll give so much they forget to fill up their own cup, so they have more to give. So it's
mm,
really important for them to take time out to nurture self as well.
mm-hmm.
And the maverick is the final one. Yes, the maverick is the risk taker. That's one of their gifts. They're really good at taking risks, but again, they need that balance, and they tend to find balance a little boring. I'm thinking of a friend of mine a few years ago who has a primary maverick, and they poured everything they had into one investment. And they're very trusting, and they trusted the wrong people, and they lost everything.
Oh no.
And so that's the risk of the mavericks. You want to have that balance. So when you're taking those risks, you're not risking what you can't afford to lose. They can be very charismatic, and they excellent at the financial details. Um, so again, so that's all eight, and that's how it I just sort of focused
Okay.
on the financial end of it.
Yeah. No,
But
but there's much more.
yeah, when you read the book, I go into how it impacts intimacy and relationships and self-care.
Okay.
So I
So
go
if
into all
someone
that.
was interested and they want to do and get their own archetype, so they'll go to your
Mhm.
website
Yeah.
and they take the quiz there, and it's very reasonable, very, very reasonable to take the assessment. And then I forgot, do they get the ebook right after? Or does the ebook have to be purchased separately? Tell me about that.
No, you get that at the same time. So when you
Okay.
it's only $7. And so when you get the quiz and the book, you pay the $7, you get access to the quiz immediately. It takes about 10 minutes or so. It's
Okay.
basically multiple choice. It's strongly agree, agree, neutral, disagree, strongly disagree. It's one of those five answers for every question. And then you automatically get the book. It's an ebook, it's in PDF form. So you automatically get that sent to you.
Okay, great. And then once they have their information, right? So like I have the Empress, I definitely remember that was mine.
Mhm.
And they have the accompany ebook. What do you recommend? Like, how do they use this knowledge, like either personally or professionally? Like, how do you, say, hey, now that you know what your predominant archetype is, like,
Mhm.
what do you do with that?
Well, in the book, it'll really go into detail what the unique challenges are of each one, and you'll recognize that, oh yeah, this has been showing up for me, and then you tap into the ones that will balance that out. For example,
Mm,
again, using myself as an example, I do suck at paperwork. When I
yeah.
focus on it, I'm really good at it, but I tend to procrastinate and put it off. And um, finally, I'm getting around to hiring a bookkeeper this year. And, I finally acknowledged to myself that I really need to pay somebody who's got the guardian in them, who really enjoys doing this, because
Yes.
I don't, and I keep putting it off, and it gets done, but it's not being maintained the way it could be. So just
Okay.
recognizing where your challenges are showing up professionally and personally, and how to be able to tweak that to bring that into alignment for yourself.
Okay. I love to travel, and I see that you also do these amazing retreats. So you're
Mm.
going to, I'm just like throwing it out there to everybody in case you're like planning some vacation, as we're recording this. Like, so
Mhm.
Sicily is going to be in 2025, and I see Tulum,
Yes,
Mexico is going to be in 2026.
yes.
So just was wondering like what led you to do these retreats, and like what happens there? Are they just like vacations, or are you doing pleasure and sacred pleasure and prosperity like there? Tell me about your retreats.
Well, these are destination retreats, so it's a blend of both.
Okay.
If it was just diving deep into the process, and you could just rent a hotel near the airport, but we're going to Sicily, so we're going to really incorporate that whole space of enjoying the space. And it's the home of the goddess Venus. Italy is where the goddess Venus comes from, and she's the ultimate goddess of pleasure and prosperity. That's
Oh,
one of the
that's
reasons I
fun.
chose it as well. And near where we're staying, there's actually, I forget how to say it in Italian, but it's what's known as the Pool of Venus. It's a very famous pool at the foot of a cliff. You can only access it by boat. And it says that's where the goddess Venus used to go bathe to wash off the essence of her past lovers to become a virgin again, so she could be with her god Vulcan. So we're actually going to go to the pool of Venus and dive in and have a swim if for anyone who wants to do that. And the
Oh, that's
pool
super
of Venus,
fun.
that's one of the aspects. So we're gonna have a lot of fun. There's a lot of dance. I use dance and movement a lot.
Okay.
And I'm doing the retreats. I just love to connect with people in person. Again, I'm the romantic. I like that connection. So I love to be live in person. I love that I can do my work over Zoom, but it's so nice to be in person and to connect in that community and to dance together and to be in that space. We'll have morning movement. We'll have wisdom circles between breakfast and lunch. Then between lunch and dinner, it's free time to enjoy the area, relax by the pool. I have this beautiful big villa with a huge pool, and there's a beach walking distance from the villa. And
Oh,
then at
sounds so
night, we
nice.
do really deep dive processes that there'll be a lot of breath work, and we'll be using dance as well as transformational experiences for healing, for opening up, for falling in love with your body exactly as it is on a whole new level, and really creating that connection with your body. And one of the reasons I'm passionate about that too, as I share with people, our physical body is the closest relationship we have with the physical world. Our spirit's
Hmm.
inside our body, and our spirit expands beyond our body. So our body is also inside our spirit. So your relationship with your physical body is the very first connection you have to the physical world. So it also ripples out to how the physical world shows up for you. So
Mm.
love being in your own body, regardless of its shape, size, whatever's going on, and create a really beautiful, loving relationship with your body that really impacts everything else in your life as well. So we'll be diving deep into that as well.
And how do you, because doing work one-on-one via Zoom is one thing, but being in a retreat with other people in person is another, right? So, yeah, I'm sure with all of your training, you create safe spaces
Very, yeah,
for people to share about their trauma, to share about their experiences.
yes.
So I just wanted to call that out because there might be someone goes, you know what, I'm really interested in one of the retreats, but I'm really scared. I have a lot of shame around my history. So what would you say to that person if they are interested in coming to a retreat?
Well, first of all, everybody's individual story of their past pain is very unique. So, as part of the retreat, when you register for the retreat, you do get some private one on one sessions with me before we even go to the retreat.
Okay.
So you're gonna work with me privately. We're gonna clear some of that stuff before we even show up there versus doing it in groups. So by the time you get to the retreat, you already will have done a lot of clearing. The pleasure and prosperity archetypes. It's fun and playful. You'll understand that before we even show up as well. We'll actually have some group Zoom calls before the retreat even happens. And just understanding what other people's archetypes as well, you all automatically already know things about them once you know what their archetype blueprint. So that's sort of the fun, playful element. But again, what you were speaking to is really important. And we're going to be working privately before you go to
Okay,
dive
that makes
into
sense.
your stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you're kind of easing people in and like working on maybe removing some of the largest blocks, right? Because I'm
Mhm.
thinking if they just like get on a plane and land in Sicily,
Yeah.
they might be a little hesitant, but it sounds like they'll know each other and they'll know you and all that good stuff.
Yeah. And create a very safe space, sacred circle. It's what happens at the retreat stays at the retreat. So there is this agreement of confidentiality. You can share your own experience, your own story, but you don't share. It's just a given that you don't share. And if someone shares something very personal and vulnerable at the retreat, that stays at the retreat. So there's that safe confidentiality that is
Okay.
grounded, that is anchored in the experience as well.
Okay, that's lovely. And I just love I love the selections that you pick, the places. So I ask every guest, I would love to hear your thought around what are 1 to 2 ways that you believe women can be braver at work today?
Braver at work, being in the power of your voice. It's
Hmm.
interesting. I had a little cough when I said that. But yeah, what is true to you? What is true to you? What do you stand for? And being true to that, following your heart. What is your soul's desire? What is in your heart? What is your heart calling you to do and being in that? Um,
Mm,
yeah, and just standing in the power of who you are authentically as you.
I like that, both of those. So using your voice, being true to yourself, being authentic, standing in your
Mhm.
own power, right? Which is what I
Yeah.
work on with my clients so often, is just standing in their power. And I just appreciate the work you do. I know it's got to be
Mhm.
challenging. I know that you love it. But I wanted to, again, just ending this, right? Wrapping this up. I really wanted to have you on at first when, I'll be honest, when I first met, I was like, I don't know if this is the fit. But then I was like, wait a minute. So when I get those like challenge thoughts, I'm
Mm.
like, oh yeah, no. We need to have you on because there's someone that could be, struggling with this, and it could be uncomfortable, and it could be impacting them. It could be impacting their professional and personal goals. And so I just
Mhm.
so
Mhm.
appreciate the work that you do.
Thank you. Yeah, and unfortunately, it's a much higher number than we'd like to think, but people don't speak openly about it because it is a secret. So,
Yeah,
yeah, when I first became certified in the modality I do, that's key modality through Zoom, the compassion key, I was the first practitioner they had who specifically specializing in sexual healing because I'd already been doing that for years. And I love this modality because now it's made it possible to do it over Zoom and reach people no matter where. And yeah, I actually put in more hours faster than any practitioner they had had in history because I was the first one specializing in a sexual wound. And so many people have that on some level to
I know.
various degrees. And, it's such a big part of who we are. Our bodies are beautiful miracles, where it's going back to the shame of religion and that stigma. This is the energy that creates our very existence. That's a beautiful thing. It can be a beautiful, fulfilling, heart opening experience. That's the truth of who we are.
Exactly. I couldn't have put a little period on that better than you have, right? So where can women that are listening, where can they find you and your work online?
My primary site is feminineartistry.com.
Okay. So feminineartistry.com, that's where you're going to find the archetypes quiz. And then,
Mhm.
of course, you'll get the ebook along with that. And then I know that you can also, through that site, I believe you can find the retreats in case that you'd like to do
Everything's
like
there.
an immersion.
Hmm.
So just lovely. And it's a power pack site. So Jaitara, I am just so thankful again to have you on and appreciate the work you do, and keep on keeping on.
Thank you so much for having me here, Jen. Appreciate it.